So today I'm going to be explaining Harman's challenge of the explanatory power of moral facts and Sturgeon's response to this challenge. First things first, why are they arguing about this? So they're studying metaethics, and they are attempting to understand the nature of moral judgments. They're trying to answer the question of, are there objective moral facts? And these moral facts determine what is right and wrong in every possible situation, which is a very appealing code of conduct. So some metaethicists are naturalists, and they believe that moral properties are similar to scientific properties in the sense that they can be observed and can directly explain phenomena in our world. So Harman argues against this view and tries to show that while science can explain our observations, morality cannot. So he describes two situations. Imagine that there is a scientist trying to test a scientific theory. She sees a vapor trail in a cloud chamber and she thinks, that's a proton. So this observation that a proton went by is evidence for her theory of protons. And this does not depend on her particular psychological state. There are actually protons. There is an explanatory chain between her observation and her theory. The theory explains what protons do, which explains the vapor trail, which explains her observing it. And now the only way for her to explain this vapor trail is to assume her theory of protons is correct, which is what makes this scientific theory objective. So now in the second situation, imagine that some children are setting a cat on fire. A bystander walks by and he sees them. So then he thinks, that's wrong. This observation does not provide evidence for any moral theories because it's solely a product of what the bystander believes and does not depend on what actually occurred. There's no explanatory chain between his observation and any moral truths. A moral theory may hypothetically state that setting a cat on fire is wrong, but it doesn't explain why he's observing the kids do it. So he makes this moral judgment solely off of what he believes is true, not some kind of objective moral truth. So now it has been suggested that perhaps the reason the kids are doing it is because they too think that causing suffering is wrong. However, whether or not it's actually objectively wrong does not explain why they're doing it. So in this case, what is actually motivating them to set this poor cat on fire is just because they happen to believe that they're doing something wrong. So this action doesn't necessarily have to be objectively wrong, and they would still do it because of their psychology and opinions. In this sense, moral objectivity is irrelevant. So now another way to look at how psychology affects interpretation of moral observations is to imagine another bystander from a different era. Perhaps in his society, setting cats on fire was something believed to be holy. Therefore, if he views his children with their cat, he'd think, that's fine. Now in these two situations, different conclusions were reached because of the viewer's psychology and opinions, rather than if setting a cat on fire is actually right or wrong. So therefore, Harman concludes that moral theories are irrelevant to explaining moral observations because whether these theories are true or false, their observations would still be the same. So now Sturgeon responds with counterexamples. He believes that there are situations where objective moral theories actually can explain why certain acts occurred. For example, it is generally accepted that Hitler was morally depraved, which is why he does all of those despicable things. So his lack of morality explains why all those acts occurred. Therefore, this moral fact is critical in the explanation of our observations. Sturgeon goes into some more detail and describes that there is no possible world in which Hitler was not morally depraved, but had exactly the same personality and performed exactly the same actions. Sturgeon describes that if there were such a hypothetical world in which Hitler were not morally depraved, then it could not be exactly the same as our world. So in this sense, these moral explanations are necessarily dependent on the physical and natural properties of the world, which supports a naturalistic approach to objective morality.